I've actually, well, not quite yet, Shayle. I actually have a little game that I have devised for you as part of this introduction. So if people have listened to the Catalyst podcast, you will know that it focuses on climate tech, and each episode focuses on a different technology. And Shayle often starts out with a pun or a play on words to highlight whatever technology this is.
That's not really, that's not on purpose. I'm just kind of a punny person. I'm not trying to, go on.
It works. So what I have done is I have put together a series of puns. And what I would like to do is to share a pun that Shayle used to tee up a technology and ask what technology it is that he's talking about.
I don't think you appreciate how little I know what I'm saying when I'm talking about
We will see how this goes. But I also think that this is too easy. I think you've written these puns, you know these puns. And something you may not know about Shayle is that when he was younger, he was a professional juggler. He was a child clown. Did I say that?
Well, I just want to be clear, those are very different things. I was sort of a professional juggler as a kid.
So I would like you to answer these while juggling.
All right. So I saw the juggling balls on stage, and I knew something like this was coming up. I just want to be clear, this is the second time you've ambushed me with the juggling thing. The other time was during COVID, like on a webinar or something. So I'll do this, but we're agreed. This is the last one. This is a prerequisite for me.
Can we take this offline?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So, are you ready? Hey, Kevin, do you have any Catalyst music you can play?
Please don't.
Okay. So, starting out, the first one is, I would make a blank joke, but I don't want to give it any oxygen.
Oh my God, what was I talking about? I don't want to give it any oxygen?
I wouldn't want to give it any oxygen.
Was that like a hydrogen electrolysis thing? Because it splits hydrogen and oxygen?
It is anaerobic digestion. I would not want to give it any oxygen. The next one is...
That was a good one. That was a deep cut. All right.
Okay. This week, it's blank, not blank, but that's splitting atoms.
Nuclear.
So what is it? This week, it's blank, not blank.
Fission, not fusion, or fusion, not fission.
Correct, yes. Yeah. Okay, this one is...
The juggling part is the easy part of this, by the way.
Hello, Daddy. Hello, Mom. It's a blank bomb.
Cherry bomb. I have no idea.
Methane bomb. This one is a methane bomb. Okay.
All right.
Hey, look, on the grid, it's a battery. It's the world's most flexible load. It's a vampire squid. It's blank.
It's a battery. Oh, Bitcoin mining.
That is correct.
I remember that.
All right. Okay. Blank leakage. It's nothing to make light of.
Make light of hydrogen?
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah, periodic table joke. Okay. Okay.
This is stressful.
Some might say food is energy, just food for thought.
Well, the food energy nexus.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Okay.
Sun was in my eyes. It's okay.
Okay.
Classic juggling drop joke.
We have one more question, and for this, I would like to add one more ball. Are you ready for this?
I don't know. We're gonna find out.
Okay. What?
Go fast.
What is the drinking game your wife has developed around your podcast?
Oh, I say everything in numbers. I'm like, there will be 3 things that will matter in terms of methane, and then I list 3 things.
That's correct, that's correct. So you can now play along next time you listen to Catalyst. Thank you so much. I will now get off the stage. This is yours.
Thank you. I just want to be clear, we all agree this is never happening again. You all heard Sarah confirm it. All right, that was unexpected. Okay, on to the state of climate tech, super relevant. Okay, so my job is to spend 15 minutes talking about the state of climate tech. There's obviously way too much going on in climate tech to talk about in 15 minutes, but I will say this to start. I'm excited about the fact that climate tech is a thing. You know, I was thinking back on, so I've been doing stuff in what we now call climate tech, but did not for a long time for my whole career. And for most of that time, first it was clean tech, right? And then that fell out of favor, and then we stayed away from that term, and we started grasping around for things like sustainability and resource efficiency and whatever else we wanted to call it. And then like 3-4 years ago, climate tech emerged. And now we had something to call it again. And it has really like galvanized a movement, a community, and a sector of sorts in a way that is incredibly exciting. So I'm happy to be able to talk about the state of climate tech. I think I have 3 things that, as I was thinking about the state of this space, matter to me at the high level. The first is that it's actually, the way that I think about it at least, it's fairly simple. It's fairly straightforward, which is appealing. The second is that I wouldn't confuse simple with easy. It's hard. That's no big surprise. Everybody knows climate tech is going to be hard to achieve what we need to achieve, but I think it's perhaps even harder than we give it credit for often, and harder in different ways. And the third is sort of an orthogonal thing, which is basically the way that I think about climate tech, the tech portion of that, the technologies that need to be developed to get us to the promised land. They come in waves, and any given technology fits somehow into a wave. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start with why it's deceivingly simple. To me, when you really boil it down, climate tech is easily measurable in a single metric, which is tons of CO2 equivalent, right? We know as a society what we need to do, society globally, right? And that is to go from where we are today, which is roughly 50 gigatons of annual CO2 equivalent emissions, that's 50 billion tons a year. We need to take that down to 0 or net negative potentially by mid-century or earlier. That's the job. And so for me, as I think about what is climate tech, before we get to what's happening in climate tech, if you can measure the impact of a thing, a movement, a technology, a company, whatever it might be, in either direct reduction or removal of CO2 equivalent, or if it has some indirect impact on the ability to get there, which is important, right? Enabling technologies that make it possible for us to electrify things, or make it possible for us to have a just transition, which we're going to need to have in order for that transition to occur. Anything that you can tie directly or indirectly to CO2 equivalent, that's climate tech. Maybe this is a little bit controversial. If you can't, I would say it's not. Not to say it's not worth doing, but to say it's a different thing. And for me, that's a useful guiding principle, because once you go one level deeper than just CO2 equivalent, things start to get pretty complicated. And you can look at these charts, and I love a Sankey chart. That's the name of this type of chart, my favorite type of chart in the world. If anybody has cool Sankey charts, send them my way. This is where all the emissions come from in the world, the CO2 emissions, and it's really complicated, unsurprisingly. So to simplify that, here's what we need to do, basically, to solve climate change at the highest level. We just need to transform 5 sectors: energy, transportation, industry, buildings, and food and agriculture. Those 5 together comprise the vast majority of all CO2 and actually greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So what I mean when I say climate tech, I often tell people I don't think climate tech actually is a sector. It's just a common theme across a number of sectors, a common problem that we face across a number of sectors, and mostly it's these 5. So what is climate tech mostly going to ultimately be? It's going to be technologies that transform one of these or multiple of these 5 sectors. And then I would add on another half sector, which is carbon management, which is basically entirely new, right? So these other 5 are like existing multi-trillion-dollar global industries that drive the world. So we need to transform those 5 and then invent a new one, because we don't really manage CO2 today, but we're going to need to do that, whether that's biogenic CO2 from wood waste as we thin forests in California, or whether that's direct air capture from the sky, or point source capture on heavy emitters, whatever it might be. We're going to need to capture some of that CO2. We're going to need to do something with it, and that's carbon management. So there's our job in climate tech, right? It's also helpful, I think, to think about it in a temporal perspective, right? The timeline under which we need to do that. So just for context, right? Basically, to get to where we are today, to create the problem that we created, where we have 50 gigatons of emissions every year, it took us about 100 years, roughly, from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution until fairly recently. Figure that is the lifespan, more or less, of my grandparents' generation, right? When they were born, we were not that much out of equilibrium. By the time they passed away, we were roughly at the spot that we're at today. So about 100 years to get there. And you know all the things that happened over the course of those 100 years. Amazing growth in our quality of living and population growth, but it came at this cost of emissions. So to contextualize the pace at which climate tech needs to happen, this is my son, Atticus. He's 20 months old right now, so he's born February of last year. This is him eating a mole drumstick, which is one of his favorite foods. And I think about it, unsurprisingly, because I have a young child, in the context of his lifespan, right? And so if to get to 50 gigatons of emissions, it took an entire lifespan, in fact, a little bit longer, 100 years, what the IPCC math is telling us is that we need to get from 50 down to 0 and then negative, because we are probably going to overshoot by 2050 or earlier. So 2050, Atticus is going to be 28, right? He's going to be younger than most people in this room. It's really not a lot of time to reverse a 100-year-long trend. And so though climate tech and the idea around what we're trying to do is fairly straightforward, it's reduce CO2 emissions, the pace at which we need to do it is somewhat daunting. And that speaks to the other point, which is that it's really hard. When people talk about how the various components of climate tech and the sectors that it comprises, oftentimes there's this term that I'm on a soapbox, and so I get to shout from it right now. There's a term people have started to use that's hard to abate, right? And usually when they talk about hard to abate sectors, they're referring to things like industry and buildings and food and agriculture. You also hear it a lot often within industry in the context of steel and cement and chemicals. These are the hard to abate sectors. I don't disagree with that. I think it's going to be hard. But the implication there is that some of the others, and I think particularly people are referring to energy, will be easy. And I don't think that's true at all. So I want to spend 1 minute just talking about energy. It's partially because I spend most of my time there, but also because I think it's indicative of how we have to think about the types of challenges that we face here. So to the highest level, the heuristic for how do you solve climate change in energy is also pretty simple. And I think most folks would agree with this. It is decarbonize electricity, then electrify everything you reasonably can electrify, thereby switching things onto a decarbonized grid, and then pick up the remaining pieces via some combination of carbon management and clean fuels, right? So if we're going to do that, then the electrification part of that, step 2 in that journey, means we're going to, drive electric vehicles up to significant adoption, ultimately maybe 100% of the market, at least for light-duty passenger vehicles. We're going to use heat pumps instead of gas boilers. We're going to turn some of industry into electrically powered. We're going to power a bunch of other stuff with electricity as well. And indeed, I think a lot of that is going to happen. A lot of that is going to be great. But I do want to point out the magnitude of that challenge that it introduces in the energy sector. As it stands today, and I think people often don't remember this, electricity is about 20% of final end-use energy consumption. So of all of our energy consumption in the United States, 20% is electricity, the other 80% is not. And what we're doing in the context of electrifying things is shifting that mix, right? And so if you add it up in sort of an extreme version, you take current electricity consumption and you add all the light-duty vehicles and the heavy-duty vehicles and the space heating and industrial process heat and then a bunch of other stuff, expectations are that we might double or triple the size of the grid, the demand for electricity. So what we're trying to do in solving the problem around energy is decarbonize the electricity sector while we are doubling or tripling it. And that is not the historical trend, right? We've been in a period of fairly flat electricity demand, save for GDP growth, for a couple of decades. So we're bending that curve back upward, and we're bending it fast while we try to decarbonize the entire sector, which is to say that I don't think it's an easy to abate sector. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and lots of opportunity around the periphery if you think about all those challenges that get introduced, which speaks to my final point about building a wave or riding a wave. So I'm in the business of venture capital. I invest in early stage technology companies that do something that is going to help mitigate climate change, right? And so I see a lot of companies, and they're telling their story and pitching their vision. Usually at some point, I either answer myself or ask them the question of, are you going to build a wave or are you going to ride a wave, right? And what I mean by that is, I think what's going to happen in order for 50 gigatons to turn to zero, in order for climate tech to remain a vibrant sector, is that a bunch of major technology transformations are going to have to occur, right? And for every one of those, as I said, they're going to have to transform these sectors of the economy that are like as big as literally anything else. I was trying to think about the largest sectors of the economy that climate change won't touch. It's probably none, but if you're going to point to one, maybe it's healthcare in the immediate sense, setting aside the health impacts of climate change itself. Which is to say, these are big sectors, and a major technological transformation that fundamentally transform those sectors is going to be huge. But alongside that transformation is going to come 100 knock-on effects, maybe 1,000 knock-on effects. Other things that are going to have to get built around the periphery, the infrastructure to do it, the deployment models, other technologies. And so I think there is opportunity at both the build a wave level, which is to say, enable one of these massive transformations to occur where it otherwise would not, and at the one level beneath that, which is to say, if that transformation is to occur, here's a bunch of other things that need to happen. So, classic example of this, right? Electric vehicles. I think you can pretty safely say that we would not have the level of adoption of electric vehicles globally, I should say today, that we do were it not for Tesla. Now, maybe we would have ultimately made that transition anyway. It would have occurred at a different rate, et cetera, et cetera. But Tesla was, no question, wave creator, right? The wave of electric vehicle adoption was built by one company and then a million other things happening that enabled that company. But really one company. Thanks to the fact that that wave has been built, though, there will be, I don't know, 100, 1,000 more companies that are going to come along and deliver something of meaningful value and good returns to their investors. And they're the wave riders. And they're going to build better batteries, and they're going to build charging infrastructure. They're going to source sustainably extracted lithium, whatever it might be. And all these things are coming largely because the wave was built. And so when I'm talking to early stage companies, one of the main things that I'm focused on is, are you building a wave or are you riding a wave? There's not a right answer. Building a wave is a lot harder. It's really, really, really hard. You have to change the world. You have to bend the world to your technology. But if you can figure out what waves are being built, you can time them right, and you can build something of value in the context of that transformation, then riding a wave is an incredibly smart strategy as well. So I'll finish it up by just saying I'm like the world's worst surfer, but I intend to ride a bunch of these waves. This is sort of what I've been trying to do my entire career, long before climate tech was called climate tech. We've had a number of waves. They've had the capacity to be ridden, right? And some of them are cresting now, the wave of renewable energy being cost competitive. What an amazing thing to say today. If you had been at Verge 10 years ago, that absolutely would not have been true. And that was a wave that was clearly building then and has now reached critical mass globally. There's so many more waves to come. And so for me, it's just incredibly exciting to be in the circle of people, which is everybody here, who is trying to build or ride one of these waves and hopefully is a better surfer than I am. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to spending time with you all over the next couple of days. Thank you so much.